All right, welcome to another episode of the Back to Square One podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Some might say after this episode, he might actually just take over our podcast itself. Unlike our podcast where we upload sparingly, he actually does host a very reputable podcast of his own. But today we're not going to be talking about podcasting. The topic of choice today will be obesity and potentially also talking about whether if it's an actual choice or not. And I believe Mr. James Walsham here, hopefully I didn't butcher his last name,
No,
has
good.
actually written a dissertation about it. So before we go any further, maybe just give our listeners a little bit of a background of who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Hey guys, pleasure to be here. So, and I'm actually an avid listener of your show. I think it's very good. You guys host some good conversations. So I guess my background would be originally I studied podiatry, and then I felt that podiatry didn't have a preventative lens to help people deal with comorbidities like diabetes, obesity, etc. And then I studied exercise science, graduate diploma at AUT. And then I just finished my honors where I basically did a scoping review investigating how much evidence there is on which practitioners help people lose weight. So there's some really, really interesting results from that that were kind of shocking, to be honest. But anyway, that would be my rough background. And then as well, as you said, I have hosted a podcast, and that's been quite a lot of fun. And yeah, mainly nerding out about hypertrophy. And that was like the funnest, I guess. That's probably the best thing I did in my 20s up until now, because yeah, you can talk to people that you perceive to be famous and for free. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess to open up today's conversation, as you've kind of alluded to, James, you've obviously written a dissertation about obesity and which health profession is able to help people lose weight in a nutshell. But to give, I guess, people a little bit of a more to give, I guess, the definition of what you class as an individual who's obese, because I think there's a lot of terms out there like, oh, your BMI is above this, you're obese, but sometimes it doesn't really relate. So maybe start with what defines obesity in an individual.
So I guess I see a lot of people critiquing BMI nowadays. But so currently I'm working as a health coach in primary care, and by far the best measure of obesity is BMI. There's like no one's coming into my practice or into my clinic with like so much muscle that BMI is thrown off. But people are very quick nowadays to refute BMI and say BMI is not useful. But really, like if someone's over 30 BMI, they can be classified as obese for the most part. Like if you look at some really high, like if you look at the 105 kg powerlifters, some of them might be classified as obese, but they're like the amount of muscle they have kind of changes the picture for them from like a metabolic perspective. It's like they're able to just shuttle glucose way better than the average person with the same BMI. So it's and I see why people get annoyed at BMI, because I think like if you think of the health at every size movement, if someone's over 30 BMI, then they can be saying like, oh, they're classified as obese, therefore they're unhealthy. I don't agree with that. I think just because someone's like, I think it's important to think of obesity like a risk factor rather than a disease. It's like eating a diet high in sugar, for example. It's I would say it's more of a risk factor rather than, or like not exercising.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You mentioned just now that people will often say that BMI is not useful, right? My question is then useful for what? Because at the end of the day, useful we need a reference point for useful, right? So can you, if I just said if I want something to tell me a rough sketch of a number really quickly, right, without without any complex calculations, and someone that even someone can do it at home just by going online, right? And the result will not differ from time to time, because if you just go to BMI calculator, you do it, it's a stable calculation. The formula is not complex, you can do it easily. Then BMI will be really useful, but it's useful for that. It doesn't mean that it's useful for painting an accurate picture of the actual state a patient or a person would be in. And I think that is really important for people to understand. We as humans, we tend to categorize things into categories, and we say like, oh, cool, right? Is it this or this? Is it useful or not, right? And it's very very binary. But I think when it comes to dealing with people, and you would definitely be able to vouch for that now, especially working with, like you said, as a health coach, right? People they vary so much from individual to individual. What may be useful for someone may not be useful for somebody else. And your role as a coach is to identify what is useful for this person at this point of time, because what may be useful now for them may not be useful for them 6 months down the road, So I do think that it's like really important for you to categorize that. And I like what you brought up about like obesity as well, because obesity is a risk factor, right? And I recently spoke to a client, right, who's around early 60s, right? So this person is in his early 60s, and he's really lean, right? Used to be really active, used to play ping pong 6 times a week, right? And during the lockdown, and obviously playing ping pong 6 times a week, just without like proper without proper warm-ups, just like go in, nothing scheduled, doesn't resistance strain. The person like probably has some like overuse in the shoulder, because ping pong is a very repetitive motion. So that in conjunction with the lockdown, the person didn't really like exercise as much. And the recent blood test showed that the blood sugar level, right, HPLAC and all that markers were like slightly high, right? But this person like lean, like for average 60 years old, right? This person is like lean. So it doesn't mean that just because this person is not obese doesn't mean the health risk is not there, because his reading is slightly in the it is slightly in the diabetic range, right? So if I would look at the BMI and I'll be like, oh yeah, this person is fine, I would be doing him and myself a disservice. But on the flip side, if someone is actually obese and I say, oh, your BMI doesn't mean anything, I would also be doing the other person a disservice. And just because the person, let's just say the person he's actually who's obese, let's just say he exercises, right? A lot, right? But for me to say, just because you exercise and your BMI is high, you don't have the obesity risk factor, I would be doing that person a disservice. So I like to think of like measures like this, even when we look at certain like measures, in sports science, exercise science, as like a satellite, right? So when we look at like, we watch like spy movies where they try to like locate somebody by triangulating their location, they have like multiple satellite lock on to the person, right? The measure is like but one satellite, and the more like satellites we can have, the more accurate the picture we can be, the picture we can paint. So I really like the point that you brought up just now on how let's just not criticize something so quickly before we get into the nuance of things. And I think like that unfortunately is quite lacking in today's day and age.
And I find like I definitely have seen that in practice, where some of my really lean patients are sent to me by the general practitioner, so they're kind of screened for health already, and then I ask them questions about their health and stuff, and it's like some of the patients who are higher BMI are still healthy, and some of them who are lower BMI are really unhealthy. So it's like there's always things that don't really fit the trend. But I totally agree. It's like we need to figure out what's the actual utility of the tool, and not. I think where people get it wrong with BMI is they think if someone's a high BMI, therefore they're unhealthy. And it's like, that's not what anyone's trying to say who's using BMI appropriately. And I don't think that many people are misusing BMI, except people who actually aren't health practitioners. And that's just like angry people on the internet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think to frame it, like we usually say something like using tools like BMI and all that kind of stuff. Whatever tool that you use that is very like disseminated easily. People usually like ceteris paribus, which is all things being equal. Someone that has a higher BMI will probably have a higher probability of certain risk factors compared to the person that have a lower BMI. All things being equal, that is the key word, right? But the fact is that for individuals, it's almost not all things being equal, but it just gives us an idea, right? It gives us something to start and investigate. That doesn't mean that the BMI is conclusive, right? It allows us to investigate in a certain direction. If it's wrong, we just don't use the BMI for this person. It doesn't mean that this tool is completely broken and has to be completely tossed out.
Yeah, and it's incredibly cheap. Like if you think about the other measures that we use in practices, like for instance, if we go get blood tests for cholesterol, HbA1c, etc., it's like that stuff costs money and it costs the patient time. But BMI, it's like, how much do you weigh? Oh, cool. You don't know? Let's go get on the scale. That takes 2 seconds. And then instantly we have that kind of measurement. But other things, pretty much everything else takes some form of time or money, whether that's money for the patient or money for the practice. So it's BMI is pretty much the only one that's basically free and it's always in there. And I can update it. Like if they say to me like, oh, I lost 5 kilos, then I can just go update it, boom, new BMI is automatically calculated. So it's like, lots of benefits, I reckon, of it.
Yeah, and I think especially with sort of like the health space these days, it's, there's a lot of criticism with tools like Kedrick, you describe it, it's a tool, it's a metric. And I think some people potentially just disregard it because it in this day and age of cancel culture and keeping everything PC, telling someone that they're obese is not nice, and I think that's potentially also where the whole BMI conversation, and I guess in relation to either obesity or the other end of the scale, tends to get a very bad rep, because people tend to think of it, the general population, not necessarily the health system, but the general population will view BMI as a label. Not so much. I think the general population view BMI as a label, and not so much as how we health coaches or nutritionists, RDs, whatever, view it as a metric to kind of say, as an indicator, like Kedrick said, like it's an indicator to say, hey, this is a direction that we probably have to take. Which leads me to my next question, which might tantalize you, maybe, in regards to, I guess, with patients or clients who show signs of obesity, or maybe even diagnosed with obesity. And as most people will probably know, you're not born obese. Very, very unlikely you are born as an obese baby. If you are, I'm sorry to hear that, but very, very unlikely. But obesity is one of those risk factors or that develops over time. It's not something that happens within like a day, or you don't just get obesity just like, you wake up like cancer. In your opinion, I guess, working with so many clients, is obesity a choice?
I think I think the question has multiple components. But so I guess I would definitely agree with the idea that obesity develops over a long period of time. That's definitely the case. So we know people basically gain weight progressively over time, really, really slowly. But then we know people can lose weight really quickly as well. So it's like, let's say you gain 20 kilos, you could lose that in a year, theoretically. But it's like, what method are you getting to get rid of that? That's one part of the equation, right? And so there's a few reasons that I would argue that obesity is not a choice, but getting work, like there's always, for everyone, there is a pathway in which you can manage into obesity by yourself as an individual through motivation and willpower. Like that's totally a pathway that you can take. But I think that pathway is I wouldn't say it's like closed off, like there's a, like say if it's a literal path, it's not like it's closed off, like there's a concrete wall in front of you, but maybe it's very, very, there's like a hot barrier of steam or something, like something really painful to walk through. And like you'll burn your hands off or something. For I think a lot of people, for some people, it is a relatively smooth path. But I think for most people, the reality of life in the 21st century is it's really difficult to prioritize weight loss when you're, I don't want to give too many examples, but it's like you hear these tragic things where like weight loss does become these guys' last priority. And I would say, yeah, like, yes, the thing is people can, like, you could learn to track calories, but how do you know that that's the right method? Because carbohydrates are bad, by the way, because I listened to that on the Joe Rogan Experience, and they told me carbohydrates are bad. And I should probably try a carnivore diet, because Joe Rogan had a doctor on the podcast and he told me that's the right thing to eat. So like, I think the nutrition education landscape is fucked for the general public. But then if you actually take the food landscape as well, like that is messed up. We're exposed to like 500 food advertisements per day. And then it's like, you go to the supermarket and you're trying to get like healthy foods. So you get your low carb bread and you get your, I don't know what you get. You basically get a lot of packaged foods, and then you eat those for a little bit. And then you're like, oh, it's Friday, Saturday. I've been eating really clean. Fuck it. I'm going to go out and, get a tub of Ben & Jerry's and a takeaway. And then I'm going to have 3,000 calories in one go. And then you're going to feel really guilty about that. So then you restrict some more. And, this cycle kind of continues. So I think the fact that we live in a obesogenic environment really makes it hard for it to be purely a choice. Like, I don't think it's a choice in the way where I would choose to lift weights or not to lift weights. I think it's less of a choice than that. But I don't think it's purely not a choice. But I think it's like, I reckon it's like 5% a choice, if that.
Yep. I think it's a really good question. When it comes to dealing with people, it's always going to be nuanced. And I know that even during the length of this conversation, we might not be able to fully hash out every single aspect of it. But, in recent years, people, I think that, like I said, it's always never a binary thing. I do think that you mentioned the barriers that are there for someone. And we do know that people going through different life circumstances have different priorities, right? And as human beings in general, we would first prioritize survival, right? If you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Obviously, survival, you need to survive before you can make any other form of choice. Because if you're dead, you probably don't have many choices when you're dead. And the next thing you kind of have to consider would be how, I guess it's more like how pleasurable the experience you get. And I do think a large change often isn't as pleasurable for people. And some people don't know that you mentioned obesity or gaining weight, right, happens across a long period of time. And the reason why, at least to me, people don't really notice that their weight gains happening across an extended period of time, and then they just wake up one day and say, oh my gosh, I'm 10 kilos heavier. It's just that it's unfortunate that with the weight gaining experience, it's usually quite pleasurable, right?
I can vouch for that.
Hedonic eating, right, is pleasurable. I mean, it's a tautology, because hedonic basically means pleasure. But eating a lot of food generally is pleasurable, and we tend to focus on that pleasure rather than what is actually happening. Whereas if you change and you start trying to lose weight, you are removing a pleasure that someone has acquired, right? So let's just say if someone has acquired, we use some arbitrary unit, 150 pleasure points, all right, during their gaining, when they gain weight, right, and that's their state that they are in. To get them to lose weight, potentially you may have to get them down to 100 pleasure points due to limiting certain amount of foods, right? Especially when it comes to portion control. They would feel that 50 point difference in terms of pleasure. They will feel it, right? And some people cannot afford or don't want to lose their pleasure because there are other things happening in life. That is why stress eating is a thing. You know, I feel stressful, I eat to derive pleasure from eating, right? And which, if stress eating is a thing, do you think it's fair to say that people who undergo higher stress, right, would potentially have, I don't want to use the word choice, but it reduces the option available for them to easily access. I use easily access in a very, I use the word easily access because I think that some people do have barriers, right? So people who are stressful have less easy access to options that can help them lose weight. What do you think about that?
I think also I would love to get into like what some of the barriers actually look like. But I think absolutely, like, higher stress is going to do that. The people, because like if I think about, I'm going to try and not use a specific case study, but more a like generic example. I've had multiple, let's say 40 to 60-year-old women come into my my room, and we often, it's like or even 30 to 50-year-old, probably more like typical mother range, right? And a lot of the people, like many of them actually have at least one child who has a disability of some kind that makes the child take more, you know, whatever the things are, right? They've got all these things to manage, and then they work as well. And a lot of them are like, yeah, I get up at 5, 4 times a week, but then on weekends I sleep in. So it's like there's this baseline level of like biological dysregulation. It's like their circadian rhythms flipping all the time. And this is really common. And I think things like that, and then you see these patterns, right, where they will do things like, it's 5 a.m. They're not going to, you know, not hungry in the morning, whatever, you don't want to have breakfast. And then 9 a.m., maybe they have something, maybe they don't. Maybe they eat at 12. Then maybe at 12, they have one piece of toast. And then they get home, and then there's some snacks on the counter. They start snacking. And it's just these uncontrolled habits. And it's like they've had this massive morning, but then they've got other, they get home, and now it's like, cool, I've got to cook dinner. But the thing is, we all have shit we need to do as humans. I want to make sure I don't go on a tangent. What was the specific question?
The question was, how do you think stress levels affects someone's options, I guess, right?
Yeah,
that are easily accessible to them.
I think stress is a part of it. But it's like, I think stress is a side effect of the barriers. Like, I think stress becomes like, for example, I have a client outside of my health coaching business, outside of health coaching. I work with Hypertrophy Hub, and he worked, there was a period of, so he works in the financial sector, and he was working like 100-hour weeks some weeks. So we did some of our check-ins while he was on the bus home from work at like 9 p.m. And if he was in a situation, so when I first started working with him, he was like 20 kilos heavier. And if someone else was working in his position, like 10 years older, who didn't have access to, I think I'm a pretty good coach. And it's like, he's had the opportunity to find a coach who's evidence-based, knows their shit. And like, that opportunity to have that good education is the thing that saved him. Because I think if I didn't ever get to work with him, he would be gaining and gaining and gaining and gaining. So it's like he was kind of on this trajectory of becoming less and less consistent lifting weights. You know, he was kind of in the bro, like bodybuilding mindset, but then you slowly let those things go because you're working 100-hour weeks. gym doesn't become that important. Like even for myself, like when I was doing my thesis, I didn't hit the gym 5 times a week. I hit it once or twice a week, if that. And some weeks I just didn't go at all. And I think those kind of schedules are what like mess people up. But then again, I do think that partly this is down to lifestyle design. Like, okay, when you get home, do you watch Netflix or do you meditate, read a book, cook dinner, try and exert some discipline? And then I think, like personally, I do think that if you can design your lifestyle in a more ideal way, that will lead to a lower like, and this is just like this is total bro science of psychology, but it's like if you can design your lifestyle in a way where the things that you need to do to be productive or keep your lifestyle structured, like for example, prep your food for the next day or whatever it is. It's like if you can make the barrier to those a little bit lower, or make it that's your habit, I think that has a lot of positive momentum. And whether that's exerting self-discipline when you don't have to, like at work, you have to exert it the whole time, the whole 9 to 5. You have to be pretty decent if you want to get promotions and you want to earn more money. But when you get home, no one's asking you except maybe say if you're a husband and your wife's like, come on, Jerry, mow the lawns. Like that's pretty much it. Yeah, does that kind of answer it? It was a bit tangential.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that I like the point that you bring up, that you said that certain barriers often cause stress. I do think as well when people often feel stressed when they are unable to accomplish what they set out, right? It's a stress from failing, right? They see things as like, I work with people and people tell me, oh, I failed this week. I feel horrible about my decision. And then that further increases barriers, right? At least emotionally in this instance, because you will come to a point where people are accumulating so-called quote unquote failures, and then they'll be like, man, I don't think I'll ever be able to overcome this. Let's just give up altogether, and I've seen that happen before, all right, and I know it happens. And I do think that when it comes to talking about like when people go to do Netflix as well, like watch Netflix, people look at for an avenue to like, oh cool, I'm just gonna wind down, right? I'm just gonna like not think about work, but the fact is that there are also other ways to do that. I'm not saying that people should watch Netflix, but there are other ways to acquire the same effect, right? You mentioned like meditating or whatnot, but the fact is that people don't often try that option because they'll be like, oh yeah, I don't know how to meditate, right? Whereas like as long as I can use a computer, I can watch Netflix. So the barrier of entry to those behaviors, right, which potentially might cause the situation to be worse. Like let's just say if you watch Netflix and you end up instead of watching an episode, like you watch something really interesting and you binge the whole season the whole night and you sleep at like 4 a.m. instead, right? Like those things can result in worse outcomes. Those choices or like those activity, they tend to be really, really low. They have a really low barrier of entry. Whereas meditation to be like, oh, I have to sit down, I have to like maybe feel weird about myself. Then you'll be thinking, oh, do I have to like chant Om for like 5 minutes, and then I feel like it's weird. What if I can't do it? What if I can't do it well? So barriers of entry for those kind of activities are slightly higher. And I think it will bring us to a really good tangent, to talking about like actual barriers of entry, which especially when it relates to food choices, I guess, which you said that you want to address. So I think that this will be a good time to share some of your thoughts on what do you think are some barriers of entry. I think we can take it bit by bit. We start food choices first. Since we talked a little bit about lifestyle just now, I do think that, I do think lifestyle plays a role, but I also want to kind of like shift the conversation to food, because I do think that in the immediate sense, giving a rough idea for all our listeners out there on like food choices and how that affects things would actually be, I feel that it's an easier change to make, right? Like, it's easier to make a food choice for what I'm going to do for my next meal compared to compared to overhauling my entire lifestyle. Obviously,
Yeah,
there will
100%.
be intersection in the Venn diagram between lifestyle and food choices. But I would say we can start by addressing certain life barriers when it comes to food choices.
I'd say one point I would say is I think the lifestyle change comes after the food choices. Like I think usually if I suggest a positive change or they suggest something and I'm like, yep, let's set that as a plan. They make that one change, that thing then leads to like this positive momentum. That's what I usually see. But when it comes to food choices, I think there's a few things to consider. It's like one, as I kind of touched on before with like my Joe Rogan hatred, it's like that I think is a barrier to entry. How like I think the nutrition landscape is. I'm going to try and not go too ham on this because I really get pissed off at this. But it's like I think the nutrition landscape for education for the general population is really poor. One more point on this before I move on. It's like I also think within healthcare, for instance, if you take the average GP, the average podiatrist, the average physiotherapist, they have no idea about nutrition. And the education that they get is really garbage. And like, that's a problem if the average allied health professional is giving really poor nutrition advice. And I've especially seen quite a bit of it over the last 2 months and outside and inside of practice. And it's shocking the level of nutrition knowledge that the average practitioner has. And anyone who's not a nutritionist or a dietitian should not be talking about nutrition. Some personal trainers can like relay the guidelines, so that's within their scope of practice. But the 99% of health professionals, especially a lot of doctors, to be honest, should not be giving much nutrition advice. They should refer out for that because you get health professionals who only refer people, let's just say theoretically, who only refer people for a specific diet. For example, the vegan diet. They say, they will send people to a specific vegan website and they'll say you can only, and not like there's nothing wrong with being vegan, but they'll send people to that specific website and they'll say, this is how you fix your health. And then there's the other side of like keto, and then there's like more balanced people as well. But anyway, so the nutrition education landscape sucks. And then to actually make good food choices is really hard because people literally think fruit is bad for you. Like I would say over 50% of my patients are unsure about whether or not they should eat fruit. Like that is shocking. Some of them are diabetics where there's actually an argument to be made about being mindful with fruit. But the majority of them are just normal people, non-diabetic, maybe pre-diabetic. So then definitely they should be, there's like a conversation to be had around how to consume fruit. But yeah, most of them like don't know. And then there's patients coming to me saying they're reading the book, The Plant Paradox, which talks about basically why vegetables are bad. So it's like the landscape of nutrition education is garbage. So I don't think education can fix it. And I think then you take the fact that there's a massive amount of profit being made off the average food being sold in the supermarket, packaged food, whatever. Fast food's another whole thing. But then the packaged food in the supermarket is a problem as well. And then there's no lobbying for that in basically any government across the world. The lobbying's minimal, and the policy change is garbage or minimal. But there is research being done to, like, make changes here. But yeah, you can see how like annoying it is. Like I get so mad at this because it's like the amount of changes that have to actually be made to make this better is gigantic. But it's like the end is not in sight, but it's like on the horizon, like a few mountains across,
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, right? And I think one of another sort of like bro science of psychology, I'll steal that term from you, is that I think most people who are not educated in the field of nutrition, general nutrition, would always tend to lean on what their doctor would say because, the doctor solves, I'm sick. Who do I go to? The doctor, right? And I think a really good thing that I've observed is, and I've picked this up from one of my mentors, was doctors are not the problem, but doctors you see a doctor to treat, most likely, you see a doctor to treat a pathological disease. You've got a heart attack. I've got a stroke. I've got a tumor. You go to a doctor. But outside of that, like most GPs, again, general practitioners, doctors, like you said, wouldn't necessarily have even very, very basic, nutrition guidelines. Oh, you're diabetic, stop eating fruit. And then all of a sudden the patient's like, oh, fruit's bad. It's like, but there's a lot more to it, right? And I think in this day and age, at least, it does appear that a really good quote from somewhere was, doctors should train to be more like nutritionists, and then conversely, well, health coach, nutrition, and conversely, like nutritionists and RDs, whatever, should also kind of should train like doctors. And I think like potentially, rather than viewing each other as doctors versus the health space, it should really be, what can the doctors learn from the health space, and what can nutritionists and coaches learn from the doctors? Because like Kendrick, you brought up a really good point, right? Some of my clients will come in with high levels of HbA1c. The doctors will literally tell you, like, you're in range or you're out of range.
Yeah.
Right. You're diabetic or you're pre-diabetic or you're not.
Yeah.
But then, as for context, I guess I'm going to be finishing my clinicals. It's like 38 on HbA1c doesn't mean you're diabetic, but we're very close. But a doctor's not going to sit there and say, we need to work on this. They're just going to say green tick or no tick. Like on your blood work, you see like a red mark or a no red mark, right? And that's kind of where I think a lot of people tend to, as the obesity problem continues to arise, because people will look at numbers like these and, doctors say, hey, you're fine. But the trend is not suggesting you're fine. You do your annual checkups. The trend suggests that you're getting worse and worse every year. The doctor should be able to pick that up. And I think, especially you being working in that sector, I think that's probably something you see very much on a daily. I think that that barrier of entry towards the individual or the general population actually understanding on what should I be looking out for to be healthy tends to be very muddled.
Yeah,
because
they don't know where to start.
Because the doctor says literally, it's like, it's black and white. It's a yes or a no. You're sick or you're not sick. But that's just
they don't
like,
even know what they have sometimes.
And it's a snapshot in time. Blood work is a snapshot in time. The doctor won't kind of sit there like what we do, at least what I do in my
45 minutes of
and just talk to them like, hey, like this is what happened in the last 10 years. Like your blood work has been progressively been worse. Doesn't mean that you are, insert X disease, but it suggests that the doctor will do that because, like I said, doctors just don't have the time.
No, they don't have the time, and they operate, and the system does suck for doctors. And yeah, I really feel for doctors, honestly. Like, they get such a bad reputation, but in reality, it's like they are trying their damn hardest. But you literally see, like, the thing that I'm kind of seeing is like the younger ones really passionate, and they'll work with me really well, and they'll refer patients to me and make a really comprehensive, like, multidisciplinary plan. But I find as the longer they've been there, like, I haven't been there for that long, but if I just go by age, I think they seem to believe less and less in the potential for change, which I think is totally anecdotal. But honestly, I think, the really new young doctors are like, wow, health coaching is so cool. That is amazing. We can make behavior change a part of practice. But then some of them, like, they're like, doesn't work. People can't change. And I think it's important to have that faith that people can change. But some people don't want to change. And that is the reality of it. But a lot of people, like 98% of people do want to change. They do want to make progress. But sometimes they just don't believe they can. Like, I saw this person, he was quite young. And I asked, do you think you can lose weight? He said, no. And it's like, then a few sessions later, he realized that, okay, it is possible. But, the fact that they literally think it's impossible. They literally don't believe it's possible because every time they've tried, it hasn't worked. It's like, Jesus, it's tough.
Yeah, I think the like you also brought up, right? We're exposed to about 500 food advertisements a day, and that doesn't really help because, for context, I've worked in the food industry to a certain degree, and it's like the goal of the food industry isn't necessary. Like we've got like health ratings, right? Like this is a 4-star, this is a 2-star, and like in my personal opinion, that's so stupid. That's so bullshit. Like one, you're literally labeling a food and saying it's good or bad. So why are you selling a 2-star product? Like to begin with, like why are you selling a product that you deem is unhealthy to the general population? Like what's the basis on that, right? Like if anything, the company should go and say, oh, we have done all the testing, we've done all the research, and this is a 1-star product. Doritos, love Doritos, by the way. And you should just remove Doritos off the shelf, but that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen because there's such a huge disjoint between like, I don't want to go down that tangent, but it's like they literally just corporations, like big pharma, whatever.
It looks like cigarettes. They're not going to stop selling cigarettes until they're
exactly. Exactly, and everyone knows cigarettes is bad. And and everyone's trying to put up these laws. Everyone's trying to fight for certain tax, whatever it might be, but it's not going to be taken off the shelf because there's such a huge disjoint between just the general labeling and the way they package it as well. It's so enticing, bright colors, and you see like vegetables packaged in the spinach, it's just green. You're like, like you would pick the rainbow over like a monochrome color, let's be honest.
Unless you're going for like a nice minimalistic hipster like vegan aesthetic or something, like then you might go for the monochrome like beige or something.
It's interesting. We've delved a little bit into how products are created, and we talk about the industry as a whole as well, having a multidisciplinary approach, all integrated healthcare. I do think that looking at how doctors work, personally, I think that when I look at it from a more meta perspective, right? People back in antiquity, people were limited by the lack of information, right? Before the printing press was available, right? Before people was able to read, they only knew how to do one thing and knew what they were told, right? And then now it's quite opposite in the sense that we have abundance of information, right? But now the problem is that poor choices are made because there's too much information. And I think that if we were to evaluate both extremes and we look at outcomes of like, oh yeah, people aren't making the right choices. One was a lack of information. One was and now it's abundance of information. I think the common theme we have is that the ability to question authority, right? I mean, not to go into like history, but there was like back in the days with like the Catholic Church and all of that, and the Reformation, how Bibles were the only interpreted by specific group of people, right? And then they were just like told, and then the masses just follow them, right? So they couldn't question authority because they didn't know how to. But now you have like so many authority figures, and you'd be like, oh, we are still following the authority, right? And it's authority now, unfortunately, it's just based on how many people, like usually it's like how many followers you have, right? Like
if you can get Kevin Hart on a podcast.
Ooh.
Yeah, or like and
if you've got a tick on your Instagram, that's when you're an authority.
Blue check mark, right?
Blue check mark. There we go.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think that the ability, right, to sort of like question certain orthodoxy or authority becomes a very important skill. I'm not going to discredit someone for their lack of authority, but I'm also not gonna put them on the pedestal just because they are an authoritative figure in their field. Not to mention, being an authoritative figure in one field doesn't automatically make you an authoritative figure in a separate field, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is something very important for people to kind of understand. I do think that when people are taught at least I don't know whether it's education thing. When I talk education, I'm not talking about like actual education regarding like food choices or whatever, but it's more like people are taught not to like critically think about things, you know. Like they always say that if you should always seek out a contrasting opinion, especially if it's too good to be true, you know, things like this. I do think like trying to seek out information like as such is going to be very important. But then again, you kind of go back to the point where people just don't have time to seek out those information and
all the expertise to like, because Joe Rogan, like I was convinced by Gary Taubes 5 years ago. I was genuinely convinced. Like,
and I think
fresh out of high school, no education. I listened to the case against sugar, and I'm fully like, shit, man.
Yeah,
the sugar industry, because it's like you can believe it because the corporation like argument, and then you have the sugar. Oh my god, you know. The
thing is this, right? Like we talk about Joe Rogan a lot. A lot of people like to poo-poo on Joe Rogan, but I think if we look at the Joe Rogan's background, right? If people were to think about who Joe Rogan is, it'll give you a better insight on how to process his information. First of all, I would not disregard his ability to create engaging conversations. I mean, the dude has people like sitting down for 3 hours. I don't doubt his intentions. I don't think he's a malicious being. I think that he genuinely wants to seek out truth and put out information out there. Whether the information is contrary or whether it's right or wrong, I definitely don't think he should be censored on any platform. I'm a big like if there's like a couple of like quote unquote political ideologies that I really hold fast to, free speech is definitely one of them. And the last but most important thing would be looking at this person's background, right? And I think this ties in really well into the conversation about doctors. When you look at this person's background, Joe Rogan is a comedian and MMA, UFC MMA commentator, which means that.
But he gets doctors on his podcast.
Yeah, but the thing is that he's gonna be more authoritative to push back on things related to comedy and fighting.
But
right?
then I guess I would debate that because he gets authority figures on the podcast. Like, who's the vaccine guy, who the vaccine guy was. And then that's why he got removed from whatever, or there was a big political storm, whatever. Like, I don't think he should be not allowed to post that. I think he should be allowed to post that. But I think like, I don't know. There's some, it's murky as fuck for me. It's like, hey guys, don't get your vaccine. And like, I think his level that he went to was too far. Because it was developing then. Now I think it's a different conversation. Like if he had conversations about it now, like your blog post on it, I think was really well. It was well done because it wasn't like we're 3 months in. Like for him, it was like 3 months in, and then his nutrition stuff, it's like.
Yeah. So like my question is this, right? So you are concerned about the actual information that is going to be out there. My concern is not about the actual information. My concern is about how to process the information that's going to be out there. Because even if Joe Rogan no longer exists, there's someone that would take his place. You know, they always say that, is killing this dictator going to do any good, you know, in movies? Because another dictator will just rise up.
There's always going to be another one.
So things like that. And I think the key here is that if Joe Rogan speaks about vaccines, nutrition, I would give him lower credence on what he says because of his lack of expertise in certain, and this is not just to Joe Rogan, it's to anybody. My lack of expertise in that area prevents me from actually knowing how to pick out who the best person is without buying into the hype, right?
Yeah,
that's one. Yeah, right. That's why you got like Robert Malone and Peter McCullough, those two dudes, and you don't get like current people who are actually doing some form of like research, right? Whether they hold one position or not, but people who are actually doing some form of research usually have a more nuanced opinion, right? That's an example. I can't pick out my guess as well because I don't know how to critically evaluate my guess. Second is that I cannot push back enough because I don't have enough information. For example, if right now I say like, I'm an I'm a pseudo art expert, and I tell you how Picasso is actually like the worst artist in the world, and I give you all this like I give you all these facts, you probably would not be able to push back because you literally have no clue how to. It's like going to a mechanic, and you just got to trust the mechanic's not going to scam your money because you literally don't know anything about engines, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the second thing. And he can't push back. And the third one is that, yeah, you know, if he speaks about MMA and he speaks about how to be a good speaker and comedian, man, these things are like, I can trust it like 90% of the time, because these are the things that he's known for. He has done a career of. So but most people don't evaluate it from this perspective, you know.
They evaluate the person from a position of power, not so much from a position of how did you rise to power, I guess.
And the thing is this, it goes back to the point about, like I say, I don't want to like harp on like too much content, like current issues and like Joe Rogan, but it goes back to the point of being a doctor, right? What is a doctor's training, right? It's not nutrition. I've actually spoken in when I was doing my master's in the UK and I was writing up my thesis. I had a lot of free time, and I actually submitted a presentation to speak at student doctor conference, right? So it's a bunch of like medical students, right? Like third to final year students. I mean, some of them even like new med students, right? And I submitted like a paper, and there was a contest, right? Competition where doctors could submit their papers, and if they get selected, they get to present, right? I'm not a doctor. And I'm not a medical doctor, right? But I just felt like I think I could contribute because my background is in nutrition. So I wrote a paper called, and I played with alliteration and like sounds. Fat, like fat, F-A-T, fat, like being fat, and fat, like fat diets. So played with and I basically talk about like high fat diets, right? Like whether you should buy into like the sugar, like controversy, you know, things which doctors typically would believe. When I spoke, I was like really afraid because like there was this speaker that like was really good. Half the talks I didn't understand, and I was scheduled to like go first, and I thought it was good because after that, if there wasn't anything interesting, I could leave. But then the speaker that was supposed to go first couldn't make it, so I was scheduled to go last. I was like, oh man, this is so tough because the people will be like really tired after listening to the talks for the whole day, and now I have to sit here listening to things that I don't really understand, you know. But I found this speaker really compelling, so I literally had no idea what he was talking about. Basically, they were talking about like increasing like gut volume in the stomach to help people stay full by putting like an artificial balloon in their body, right, inside the stomach, like for really obese people or people who really don't have any like control. Like that's like a really easy way, because it literally is just a procedure that you put in and they just like artificially stay full. So his presentation was before mine. I literally had no clue. I couldn't rebut anything, but he was a really good presenter, and I was scheduled to present after him. I was like, man, this is like huge shoes to fill, right? And I'm not even a doctor, right? And then when I spoke about it, I was like, to my surprise, like people enjoyed the talk because they're like, the people came up to me and say, oh yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation, whatnot. But the most important thing that and the reason why I bring up the story is they said that, you know, when it comes to nutrition, I only took like an intro level course like in my first year, and now and doctors spend like 5-6 years in med school at least. Man,
I would say they give 70% of people some form of nutrition advice.
Yeah, and like I can't remember what I did 4 years ago, right?
Yeah,
like
and I don't know anything about podiatry. I did that shit like 2.5 years ago, and I don't know how to do like nail surgery anymore. I have no idea.
Right? Like so for people like me, I'll be like, they have very minimal qualification, but they are seen to be authoritative in certain aspect, obviously because it's more like tangentially related doctors and like nutrition rather than like MMA and like vaccines, right? So obviously, but people still go there because they don't know what this person is authoritative in. And I think that that's a really important way to help people critically evaluate information. I do think that by helping people critically evaluate information, you know, it's better, and we can also like say that we can promote the marketplace of ideas better, because like I say, I'm quite a big like free speech advocate, and I do think that I do think that helping people evaluate things from both perspectives critically would be really important. And drawing back to the conversation about like food choices and whatnot, right? Like even when it comes to corporations, people still think that sugar-free stuff is bad, right?
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I don't know what it costs Coca-Cola or like Pepsi to actually produce X amount of sugar-free versus X amount of sugar version. I don't know which one's more expensive, but in the stores they usually go for the same price most of the time. But the fact is that like if like corporations like this now, I think we will go into like regulation in like the food industry. This conversation would go towards that direction now. It's like, cool, how can I just tell people that I'm Coca-Cola, right? I want to boost my sale, right? There would be the adamant people that would vehemently tell you that no, the sugar version tastes better, right? I'm like, mate, nah. If I blind taste test you,
I reckon people can tell the difference. But
so
once people swap, that's like, I reckon that shit is fucking magic.
Yeah. So I think they can tell the difference because they've been having it for so long, so they can tell the difference. But
the very subtle difference.
Yeah. So, but to say that it's actually like so different to the point where it tastes like horrible and you won't drink it, it's more like
I think like, there can be this is pretty tangential, but there is like someone I know, I won't say who, had a literal addiction to Coca-Cola where they could only have Coca-Cola in a plastic bottle form. If they had a can, they'd be like, fuck. And like if they had artificial Coke, they would know and they'd be like, but anyway, it's tangential. What were you sorry.
Yeah, but like in on a general basis, right? Like Coca-Cola can just say, yeah, cool, like we can still drive out profits, right? Our profits by selling our sugar-free version, right? And we can actually just tell people, yeah, sugar-free, the sugar-free version will probably be better for you if you need to lose weight, right? So like this comes into like the whole regulation thing, right? And people can do that, right? Because right now, I do think that the authority, people who are in authority position, they have more so quote unquote power to govern or like change people's choices. They nudge them towards a certain direction. I think all of this nudges. So like you hear people in the street tell you or you shouldn't take the vaccine, then you hear more people think about it, and then you hear Joe Rogan, who has like 5 million listeners, right? Then you're like really like convinced, but at the end of the day, like if the corporations can like create some form, I mean, I don't know much about like food regulation and like regulatory powers and all of that, but like have like say cool, it doesn't really matter, right? Whether you buy one or the other. I still think it should be. I do think it should be a choice, but like if you're trying to lose weight, probably have the sugar-free version. Things like this.
I think
probably push people towards the right direction, right?
Yeah, I had a really good conversation with Alan Flanagan from Sigma Nutrition, like a year or something ago. I don't know, back when I was going hard on the podcasts before my break, and that he explained some really good stuff around like, for example, like one of the examples was, let's say we have a drink layout. We have, let's say normally you have the brands that pay for the best spots. So in a supermarket.
I remember that during my years of study now.
Yeah, and it's like if you put water in the most reachable spots or artificial sweetened drinks or whatever, the healthier drinks, that's going to make a difference in terms of sales. And it's like, I was watching this video by Stefan Guillenet yesterday about how the percentage of spending that's been on fast food compared to like home cooked meals is about 20% compared to like 2% in the 60s. So it's like, and now it's probably like 30 or 40%. But then you consider that that is not including packaged food from the supermarket. So it's like, yeah, paleo diet, boys.
Yeah, and I think you brought up when Kedrick was sort of like going through that tangent, it actually brought up so not necessarily a realization, but like sort of actually sort of made it a little bit more clear in my head as well, especially over the last few years, everyone's like health concern and shit like that. If now we actually walk into any supermarket, really, you actually start to see. I'm guilty. I do this, but regardless of what my personal choices are, you'll see a lot of like high protein stuff now, right? And it's not just like a protein powder, like whey protein. It's like high protein breakfast cereal, high protein cookie, fucking high protein cornflakes. And it's like the industry is literally trying to say, hey, we want to be healthier, but we still want you to buy our product. So we're just going to kind of pitch. I think it comes down to like the marketing again. Like we're just going to pitch this product, which is which will get us on that 4-star scale, or depending on where you live in the world, depending on what skill rating you guys use. In New Zealand, we've got 1 star to 5-star. 5-star, really good. 1-star, don't buy it. It's still on the shelf. But you also, interestingly as well, you'll see that all these 5-star products, if you actually go in and observe, they're actually not in, like you said, James, they're not in places which are easily reachable. So these 5-star products, if you go into the cereal aisle, I challenge all of it, if you're listening to this, go into the cereal aisle and look at the cereals. You'll see that all the 2-star cereals in the middle, you'll see the healthier cereals on like maybe the second shelf above, and you see the 5-star cereals, which are like the high protein stuff, or like the whole grain, low sugar, like you see them all above. And it's just like a testament to like, hey, this product exists. We want people to get healthier, but we're just going to keep selling what sells the best. And like Kendrick said, don't know about the profit margins and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just a very interesting observation. And
I agree.
Yeah. And I think, one thing that I'll probably add in there as well is, I'm not, again, like, I don't necessarily have a political agenda or whatever, but I think the big thing that food industries and the food regulatory board, and I've done the whole bloody thing during uni in a few years when I was at work. I think the agenda has to definitely be more geared towards not just to produce product or packaged foods for the sake of taste, but I think there has to be a lot tighter regulation on how you put the product in the supermarket, because I'm sure all three of us here would know this general advice. If you want to eat healthy, shop on the outside aisle. Don't go into the middle. That like all supermarkets are laid out that way. Big, small, it doesn't matter. It's laid out that way. And I think the regulations of how supermarkets should be putting their foods should actually be revisited, because that rule has been there.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard that rule, but
there you go. Yeah.
I used to work in a supermarket, and all the food that would keep you moderately healthy is on the outside.
Yeah.
Which is actually super interesting, except the ice cream.
Yeah. So you'll see like
what ice cream keeps you healthy. Don't diss an ice
cream.
cream.
It's carbs.
The Halo top.
Yeah. It's carbs and dairy, mate. But yeah, it's interesting, right? Like you see, like you walk in, it's like it's generally on the outside aisles, all the veggies and the protein stuff. But as you get closer to the middle aisles, which most people actually divulge into, that's where we kind of see like the highly ultra processed.
Look that stuff's been there for weeks.
Yeah, that stuff's been there for weeks, and this is just personal anecdotal guess. My guess is because like the layout of the supermarket is designed to make sure that the workers don't do a lot of work. Like you said, the stuff in the middle has been there for weeks.
Yeah. So I used to work.
The fresh produce has to be rotated. So it's like, it's just easier because it's closer to the fridge. It's like, it's easier. Whereas in the middle, it's like, it's so far away.
It's designed for efficiency, 100%. I used to work at a supermarket as an online, like I would be the online delivery boy, and it's designed for efficiency. And like that, I just realized how actually that structure of the outside
and the inside,
that's the stuff that needs to get restocked all the time. Everything in the middle gets restocked like once a week.
Exactly my point. And that's kind of one of those things where it's like most people, like general public, again, like we're talking about Gen Pop here, won't necessarily think of it that way. But I think if the food industry is able to actually, let's just use the word, drop their ego and actually really focus on making people healthy and not, again, potentially having the agenda of trying to just make more profits, I think it can really, really help to change direction and the trajectory of overall health in general in the long run.
I do think it's going to be like an almost impossible task. And like, I'm all for capitalism. I love capitalism, but I genuinely think under the current system of capitalism that we have kind of in the West, it's going to be genuinely impossible to solve diabetes. I mean, not diabetes. Yeah, but diabetes and obesity. I think it'll be literally impossible unless we have medicine that can decrease calorie absorption by like 30 or 40%. Like for real, I literally think it's genuinely impossible. I think the machine that drives profit and the capitalist machine is the thing causing obesity, whether we like it or not. Like I love capitalism. Capitalism is the shit. And like I believe capitalism brings people out of poverty faster than any other system in the world, like all the Steven Pinker shit. But it's it causes obesity at the end of the day. And there's not much we can do about that, to be honest. Like, we can try and make all these different laws and regulations, but there's going to be a 40, 50, 60-year process, not a 10-year, oh, we make some changes. Like, I think it's like the supermarket stuff is really useful, but it's such a small change in the scale of things, because people can't afford vegetables, like, and people can't afford to make the time, they can't afford to learn about this stuff, they can't afford to go to the doctor, they definitely can't afford to go to a dietitian. And if the dietitian is the argument I made in my thesis is like, the only person who's really qualified to work with people on weight loss is a dietitian. Like, if they have they have diabetes, they have high cholesterol, the only person who's really qualified to work with them to help them lose weight is a dietitian. It is impossible to get a dietitian appointment through the public health system. Near impossible. Like, it's going to take a long ass time, no matter what situation you're in. So if you go privately, boom, $160 or whatever. Like, you can't see dietitians very easily or very cheaply. People can't afford that shit.
Yeah, I think it's funny you brought up like all of this, and I think that the industry is very profit driven. And you talk about capitalism and things like this. And I think people do ask me what my thoughts are on this kind of stuff sometimes, and I just think that, Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nation, who's like, oh yeah, people say, oh, it's the father of capitalism, right? And what Adam Smith had envisioned in 1776 did not take into account advertising, social media, and all of that.
Yeah,
right?
no.
People also don't know that Adam Smith wrote the theory of moral sentiments in 1759. I don't know whether it's coincidental, but perhaps most people in like the Enlightenment period do think that morality played a big role. So perhaps you say, oh, maybe you should read about how to be a moral human being first before trying to sell shit to people. Whereas now capitalism is like,
make money first.
Yeah, amoral, right?
First 20-year-old, make a bunch of money.
Yeah,
fuck morals.
I have no responsibility at all, right? And the thing is like this. I do think that corporations, even people, right, everybody have like some form of like social responsibility to one another, and I definitely think, like, for example, there are ways people can do things, right? Like, I mean, I don't work in any of this like corporations, but this happened to me like just 2 days ago. And what happened was that I wanted to get sugar-free soda, right? Sugar-free Coke. I mean, let's say soda because I don't care whether it's Coke or Pepsi. I just buy whatever's on sale. So I went there. I saw vanilla Coke, right? I went in, I bought 2 bottles of vanilla Coke, and then I walked out. And I'm like, when I put the vanilla Coke in my car, I realized that I bought the sugar-free, the sugared version. And the reason why is because if you look at Coke, the vanilla Coke look very similar to the no sugar version. The colors are the same. The only difference is that they have a black line, right? And then the cap is different. The cap is black, whereas the original Coke is red. But if you look at Pepsi, the color is completely different. The whole label is black, right? Whereas the regular Pepsi is blue. So it's easier for people to create that distinction, right? I'm not a lobbyist for the Pepsi Corporation, but I'm just saying that if people can make like subtle differences like this, but I'm the kind of like, I'm never gonna drink like sugar version. So I literally just went back in and like swap it out because I haven't left the groceries. I just say that, hey, I'm sorry, I literally just walked out of this place 5 minutes ago. Can I just change it? But some people be like, nah, I'm a little bit too shy. I don't care. Let's just do it now, right? But the thing is that I would also fully admit on that day, I had like not the best sleep the last night. And I was like, maybe my coffee hasn't really kicked in. But the fact is that when most people do their shopping, they're not in a 100%
cognitive,
cognitive competent state, right? People are like, after work, I just have to buy some food, right? And then they'll be like, I'm just like walking around habitually just picking up the stuff that I want. So you mentioned really good points. I do think that that there's a way to regulate it well. I don't really my personal belief is that I don't think that there should be like forced regulation, right? Like there should be a fine balance. I agree
with that for like a freedom kind of point of view, but I can see the argument from a pure. But then the thing is, health is not just physical health. So
so it is encompassing multiple areas. And I think we've gone on many tangents, and this conversation is like really interesting. And but to keep it like accessible, we will have to like cap it somewhere. And based on your kind of opinion, right? Just to close things up, and we usually ask our guests all of this if you know someone who, if you are obese, right, or if you know someone who is obese that you want to help, right? Taking it back to square one, right? What is the first few things you should consider, whether it's for yourself or for that person? Yeah.
I would say, let's say you have a friend who's obese. So I'm helping a friend at the moment. And he knows that I'm like in terms of my friend group, I'm definitely an authority, right? But then in terms of the wider scale things, I'm just a dude with like some degrees, not that like expert, whatever. But like what I do with him is I get him to check in and tell me what thing he wants to change this week. But that took a year for me to get to the point where he's willing to say every week, send me one message being like, what do you want to work on this week? Last week, we worked on swapping Coke for artificially sweetened Coke. That's the thing we changed. But it's like, I'm coming from the position of someone who I wouldn't recommend trying to help someone change if you don't have the expertise. I'm lucky to have the expertise, so I think I can help someone make those small changes. But if you don't have the expertise, I would recommend trying to get them to a health practitioner that you trust. Probably not their GP, probably not their personal trainer. It's probably going to be someone like a health coach or a dietitian. But the thing is, like, health coaches are hard to get to as well. So, but I would try and educate yourself and work with them to change the environment around you. For instance, is there chocolate in the pantry? Get rid of the chocolate in the pantry. It's okay to have chocolate, but like, you don't want these kinds of things in the house if you're struggling with eating too many calories. Do you want to go to a gym? Cool. Can you join a gym together and go to a gym? But let's say you're helping a friend from the perspective of someone who thinks they have more expertise. It's definitely about it's about support more than adherence, but adherence is important. And it's about like someone comes into, like, for example, someone came in last week and they're like, man, I didn't achieve our goal. Like, our goal was to cook 4 healthy meals, whatever that looked like, right? And they would describe the meals to me and we'd sort of talk it out. And they only cooked 3, but they joined a gym and started exercising, but they felt like they'd failed. But to me, they 100% had won. So I kind of reiterated, like, wow, I'm so proud of you. And it's like those kind of statements, I'm proud of you. Good. That's amazing. I can't believe you did that. Wow, you're being so proactive. That kind of stuff gets people to change because they're like, fuck, I am the man. Like that stuff gives people positive momentum. Like if I think of my relationship with one of my best friends or my flatmate, he was trying to lose weight for a long time. And I was like, oh man, you got to join a gym. Come on, man, join a gym. All this shit. But it's like the thing that helped him change was I'm like, it's like, I'm not moving towards him to change his goals. I'm static, but I'm a static, like, loving, supportive person in his life. And then he can ask a question at me and say, hey, like, are carbohydrates bad? Or like, what does fruit do? Or like, oh, fuck, are like liquid calories bad for you, or whatever the thing is, or like, does tempo matter when lifting? Whatever the question is. And it's like just being consistently there and consistently supportive. But then also, I think if it's a friendship, being vulnerable with someone and saying, yeah, man, I've really been struggling. I've been trying to gain weight, but I don't want to push that hard in terms of food. So I'm not gaining that fast. And yeah, it's been really hard. And then they can kind of respond and say, yeah, like, me too, bro. Like, I would really like to try and lose some weight, but it's really hard and I don't know what works. And then that vulnerability leads to change because you can then support them. At the end of the day, I think it really is about the way to get someone to change is support, love, and positive reinforcement, especially in people who are not like fitness nerds like us. Like, if they're not a fitness nerd or gym bro, like, then you need to approach it differently. Like with my mom, it's like, I let her ask me questions. But if every time I've told her to do shit, She's like, nah, not doing it. It's like once you tell someone, we have this idea in health coaching, ask, tell, ask, where you ask about their life and their history, then you tell them after you ask permission to tell them. So I will say something like, oh, is it okay if I like walk you through your diabetic results? Can I explain what HbA1c is? So, and then I ask again, does that make sense? Is there anything else that you're kind of confused about with that? And am I explaining this well? And then they qualify and say, yep, that works, or that didn't work, or whatever. So that you're asking permission so you can tell them, rather than usually people go, tell, are you getting it? Are you going to make change? They ask then, and then you tell them again. Make sure you do it. If you don't do it, you suck and you're lazy. You know, it's like, that does not fucking work. No one cares. No one wants to do that. That's not good coaching. It's just egotism. And I was like that for years, so I get it. Like, it's hard to change. But yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, just to summarize everything for a listener, I guess one, find a credible authoritative figure. Second, a supportive environment, right? And James mentioned a lot of what the supportive environment would look like, and also what an authoritative figure should be like, right? And last but not least, you know, if you're drinking the non-sugar-free version of soda, switch right now. I think those are the three big takeaway points. And
unless you're bulking, then
yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So those are the three big takeaway points I think someone can do. And I really appreciate you, James, for being here. And to all listeners that have been listening and made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for listening. If you're on YouTube, I think they say smash the like button. That's what all the influencers say, right? On Spotify, share
subscribe,
it, right? Subscribe. You know,
subscribe.
Leave us a comment, 5 stars, thumbs up, whatever, you know. And thank you all, and till the next episode.
Appreciate it, guys. That was fun.